The Yangtze River, the Changjiang, or the Long River it's called in Chinese, the Great River of China. In the north you should see the Great Wall. In the south you should see the Three Gorges. This great river flows from the highlands of Tibet through many mountain ranges. Gathered from glaciers and across great plains, it drips and forms, flowing south, and then through the great Tiger Leaping Gorge, one of the great gorges of the world, past natural preserves where the home of the panda is, past great historic and cultural sites, through Sichuan province and the Three Gorges, down to the lower reaches of the Yangtze, which are broad like the Mississippi, past Wuhan and Nanjing, toward Shanghai and the East China Sea. This river is home to 450 million people and is the main highway through central China. This is Richard Heyman of Victoria Cruises inviting you on an armchair journey through the length of the Three Gorges, the most fabled section of the Yangtze River. The Three Gorges is a natural wonder of the world. This is the largest river gorge in the world. Going down the Yangtze, you can compare it to going on the Rhine or the Nile or the Mississippi. It is much larger than any of these rivers, but it is characterized by cutting through a series of mountain ranges that fold across the river as it jigs and jags through these mountains. It was cut millions of years ago, and it is comparable to going on the Mississippi River through the Grand Canyon of the southwest U.S. But unlike the smaller Colorado River, this is a giant river that carries much traffic, and the peaks rise high above the mountain ranges over the river and are full of legend. The climate in the Three Gorges area is semi-tropical. Many streams form up in these mountains and form tributaries that flow through the canyon lands and feed into the Yangtze. In this area, the traditional life of the people is difficult, but it is also full of wonder. It is one of the most inaccessible parts of central China where wildlife still does flourish. Golden hair monkeys, other unusual species such as the sturgeon and the giant salamander live in these mountain regions. It was formerly home to many pandas, but it is mostly deforested. But even today, it is an area that it has a light population in the gorges. But upstream, we're at the city of Chongqing, which is the largest in Sichuan province. This city has 6 million people in the city itself and is the major transportation and industrial center for Sichuan province, home to over 100 million people. This is the home port of our ship, and our journey through the Three Gorges begins in the busy harbor of Chongqing City. This city was most known in the West for being the wartime capital of China after the Japanese invasion, and the nationalist government moved up to this mountain city to have its stronghold. But today it is a rapidly changing city with many new industries and developments, becoming one of the major cities of China. But it is still a difficult city to navigate because there is almost no flat land. It was originally on these mountains that the Ba people had their capital and had a culture that was pre-Chinese. Then Da Yu, the great legendary emperor, came here to marry one of the royal families, and this in Chinese legend was the joining of these Western Ba culture with the Han people. Relics of the Ba remain to this day, and some of its spirit is in the local populace. The Chongqing people will also call themselves the Ba people. Later came Buddhism. In the Tang Dynasty, this great statue of the Sleeping Buddha was built. Later in modern history, the government of the Republic of China had its base here. At Huangshan is the home of Chiang Kai-shek, and also the residence of the diplomats of the period, including the American military assistance advisors and General Marshall, who came to Chongqing to stay to try to mediate the Chinese Civil War. Afterwards, the Great Hall of the People in Chongqing was built, which to this day remains as a meeting hall. But Chongqing is most famous for its lively population, colorful culture, spicy food, including the famous hot pot, or the boiling chili oil in which people dip all kinds of wonderful edibles. And then it has a great nightlife, particularly in the summer when it's hot. The night is the time when people go out to all of the nightclubs and street vendors to have a bite. This city is one of the most fragrant of all of China. But our journey begins in the morning when the traffic gets going and we hear the horns calling us down toward the Three Gorges Reach. The ships are specially designed for this section of the Yangtze River with a very shallow draft of only 2.5 meters to navigate through the rapids and over the rocks of this section, passing many stone arches and other natural features. At this site near Fuling, we have ancient carvings of the water level. When the water in the winter is so low, it was measured by these fish, which were a mark of low water, and records of low and then also up higher on the cliffs are measures of the great floods. About 175 kilometers downriver, we reach Fengdu, which is the famous ghost city. This, for over 1,000 years, has been a Buddhist and a Taoist center of pilgrimage, and is famous in popular Chinese culture as the site where ghosts, spirits reside and welcome people into the underworld. It is, to this day, a great attraction for many Chinese who come to see panoramas of the life after and the retribution of sin. One could say that it is a version of Dante's Inferno produced in graphic display. There are both ancient temple and modern automatron versions featuring the Emperor of Hell and his queen and attendants that provide an entertaining version of the traditional Taoist and Buddhist future for all of us. This was traditionally used as a teaching center in the pre-literate times. People would be brought here to be shown what would happen. They would go up the Minshan mountain through a whole series of displays and pavilions. And to this day there are festivals that display the horror and the demons that await humans if they are not obedient to the proper ethical code. Taoist masters to this day give fortunes to those who come to see what their future may entail. Here one can see the traditional money that one buys and passports to go into the city to make offerings to the spirits for one's future life. This whole complex was largely destroyed during the Cultural Revolution, but under the government supervision in the town of Fengdu, they have rebuilt both the traditional temple and built many new ghastly displays. It's almost the Halloween of the Yangtze River every day. As you arise up the mountain, climbing the many stairs, the bells greet you. And from here you can see the verdant Sichuanese countryside and cross the bridge into the other world. Today, most Chinese are not as religious as their forebears, and Fengdu has become more of an amusement park than a religious center. But the ethical sense of right and wrong and the reincarnated karmic cycle still remains to this day. Over this bridge of helplessness, people will try to step in 3 steps so as to provide either wealth, health, or happiness. And people get their choice as to which bridge they cross according to what their need is at the time. Now, at the gate of hell, it is said that men must go over with their right foot and women go over with their left foot if they wish to be the proper sex in their afterlife. And they are greeted into hell by the demons that attend the king and queen of the underworld. On the way to hell, they see the terrible punishments meted out for the improper behavior in their living days. You can imagine the terror that these sights induced in people when the forces of nature were overpowering and people's moral life was all encompassing. Now, as one climbs up into the spirit houses toward the great hall at the top of the mountain, one passes the guardians of the temple that will scare away and defeat any evil that comes up toward the altar of the emperor. And from this high tower on the very top of the mountain is the tower where spirits will look back to their life and can see their home village and think upon what they had done in their life. And then they are served a tea that makes them forget their previous life so that when they are reborn, they have no memory. Today one can buy the same tea, but not forget. Today, Fengdu is a pleasant visit. Many parks and pavilions, many interesting features. Things that you see in Fengdu are known around China, but not so displayed. And then there are many famous poems and sayings that remind one that in this life you must prepare for the next, because your actions today will always have a reaction, and you will be back to try again. Now, the city of Fengdu is now a large agricultural center on the banks of the Yangtze. And our ship is at the dock and sets off to see other sights just downriver. Here in Cai, there is a famous pavilion called the Jewel of the Yangtze. Up on top of this rock pillar is a temple that is accessed by a pagoda of 12 stories, wooden stairs that are attached to the rock. This pavilion was built about 500 years ago without any nails, with beams, mortar, and attachments into the stone that have withstood all these years. And as one climbs up, one has views of historic figures, and also the mother goddess has a small niche altar on the way. But particularly there are wonderful views of the Yangtze River from this pavilion. This area was fabled during the Three Kingdoms period, and panoramas of the time are displayed. But here we see the stone treasure, which is the Chinese name for this temple, which relates the story of the rock used to give forth rice to feed the monks at the top of the pavilion because it was such a hard climb to get up. But a greedy monk one day tried to enlarge the hole to get more rice, and then the stone stopped giving forth rice. The moral of which is, be happy with what rice you have. This village below is quite charming because it has no motor vehicles. The walkways are very ancient and only for pedestrians. Life in these parts is largely agricultural, and one can still see the fishermen, boatmen, small transport vessels working the way up and down the river. But many gather at the city of Wanxian, which is the gateway to eastern Sichuan province and a major industrial transportation center with large markets bringing in many items from the countryside. This is the home of the Mandarin orange. It's also a silk producing region and an arts and crafts center. This is the Tower of Wanxian, and outside the city itself there are waterfalls and arches again in the mountainside, but a very large temple called the Xuan Guitang is one of the largest Buddhist temples in Sichuan and has been restored and returned to the Buddhist monks. As we pass down the river, we pass the Zhangfei Temple in Yunyang. Zhangfei was a hero general of the Three Kingdoms period, and in his death, he was brought here for burial. The Three Kingdoms in the 3rd century AD was the great civil war of China between the north, south, and west, which produced the legendary heroes of the time, Zhangfei, Liu Bei, and Guangyu, who fought battles up and down the river. This is the legendary time, almost comparable to the Knights of the Round Table. And many records are inscribed in stone and mounted at the Zhangfei Temple. These also include very delicate paintings that were inscribed in stone as a way of preserving the record of the time. The Yangtze then narrows as it runs towards the east to enter the first of the 3 gorges, the Chutang Gorge. This is the Kuimen, the great entrance to the gorges. It is at the mouth of this gorge the city of Fengjie lies as a major agricultural center, and nearby is the Baidi Temple. This hill right at the entrance to Chutang was a stronghold fort built in the Han Dynasty and then strengthened during the Three Kingdoms period. It sits on the hill as a guardian of the entrance into Sichuan province. Here, Liu Bei, the king of the state of Shu, after being defeated downriver, took his refuge, and dying, his sons were ready to ascend to the throne, but Liu Bei wanted his trusted prime minister, Zhuge Liang, to ascend to the throne. But the honorable minister said, "It is my duty and loyalty to serve your sons, as I have served you." On White King Hill in White King City is the astrology pavilion where many poets have come to admire the view and write poems extolling the wonderful features of this area. The writings are left on tablets in the temple. This bamboo leaf tablet is a poem that is written in the form of a bamboo. It says, "Do not thank the east wind. The peony will open on its own." Other delicate carvings include the phoenix peony stone, the phoenix being the female symbol that gives life to the male, or the dragon symbol. And in this stone tablet pavilion, there are many masterpieces of Chinese calligraphy that are a mecca for lovers of literature to this day. As we descend down the hill and board our ship again, we sail through the great Chutang Gorge with its swirling waters. This was the great hazardous stretch of the river that in traditional times it was said it was easier to climb to heaven than to get to Sichuan. But now many of the rapids have been cleared and our ships just sail easily through the gorges. It is one-way traffic, carefully controlled, but we pass unhindered over stretches where many people died toiling to get up the rapids. And at Kuimen is one of the most narrow stretches of the gorges. It's only 50 meters wide, but the river at this point is at its deepest, the deepest river in the world, estimated at 400 or more feet deep. It is unknown because the rubble and rock and silt makes soundings inaccurate. But through this narrow gorge pass half of the water that then flow into the East China Sea. And above the swirling waters rise the magnificent rocks, and countless generations have called to them for help. At this point, at the low water, you see the iron posts that used to block off the river for the tax collectors. And the people would walk through the gorges on walkways that were cantilevered out by wooden posts. Now people can take the ships readily through. But in previous times, it was a great toil where many trackers would pull the ships up through the gorges. To this day, some small boats are still tracked, but the toil of the past has been replaced by modern conveniences. These stone poles are the remains of the Mengliang ladder, which was a walkway built up the side to get to the top. It was said to be built to retrieve the body of Mengliang, a warrior of the Three Kingdoms period who had died down below. this feature, the hanging monk, is said to have been a monk who was disobedient and was hung on the side of the cliff where his image remains. The springs that feed these stretches of water that flow into the Yangtze are very pure. The rock is mostly limestone. The karst formations are filled with caves and springs. On the great white wall on the south bank of the Yangtze have been engraved sayings from many generations describing the heroic feats of the past in this most difficult stretch of the river. One of the first peaks that we see is Liu Bei on his throne. But on a different perspective, it looks like a rhinoceros standing on the peak. The ancient tracker walkways still remain, where one can still go for a walk through the gorges. A century ago, hundreds of coolies would be tethered with bamboo straps and be lugging at laden junks trying to get up over the gorges. Offerings at temples along the way and bless the river spirits for giving them safe passage. At this point, the Bellows Gorge has a broad opening, and from the river looks like an ancient ironworks bellows. Every section has its legends and stories and spirits that were lost into this deep and turbulent water. High above the river are caves where treasures were once hidden or found. But this area has now a considerable archaeological research being done, and there have been remains found of the early Dashi culture in the Stone Age, showing that however rugged and difficult this particular terrain was, people lived here and managed to survive and create cultural relics. These are Ba culture relics from about 3,000 years ago. The Ba people who became Sinicized, became joined with the nation of China, remain in the area, living in the canyons and earning their livelihood as they have for generations, fishing and training. As we leave the Chutang Gorge, we reach Wushan. This is at the entrance to the next gorge, the Wu Gorge, or the Witch's Gorge, named after the sorceress who gathered herbs in ancient times and was a founder of Chinese medicine practice. At Wushan, our ship stops and we go up the Daning River to see the three lesser gorges. This canyon land extends for hundreds of kilometers up through the mountains. Streams have cut deep canyons that are navigable in small wooden boats. We go up small motorized sampans through the Longmen, where there's a new bridge built, up through the Emerald Gorge. This is like the gorge on the Yangtze. It has the remains of the cantilevered walkways, the plank roads where transportation carried along salt and other valuable objects before there were readily accessible water transport. But here the water is clear and potable. Springs come out of the water. The mountains are rich with resources. Even in the farthest back canyons, there are small villages where people eke a living, gathering herbs, growing crops. On our trip on the Yangtze, this is one of the most unique places because we see a life that is long gone in most populated parts of China, and it is as if we are traveling back in time. Now, the Iron Coffin Gorge is further upstream. The mountains rise very high over the shallow river. There are caves and springs that leap out of the mountainside. And the unusual feature of this are the coffins that are placed in caves and completely inaccessible ledges. This was a custom of the Ba culture where their high-class deceased were put in coffins in places where no humans or animals could reach them, to where they remain to this day. The limestone mountains, with their overhanging cliffs, produce cave-like formations that are visible. High over the river, these peaks loom, and each one has a name. This one is the Bodhisattva, or Guanyin, goddess of mercy, sitting on a lotus petal. We pass the local people and their craft that have not changed for hundreds or maybe thousands of years. They gather rock at the low water, the ship downstream for construction, and then pull their boats up in ancient tracking technique back to their villages. The people's life here is simple and hard, but it is refreshingly clean compared to other parts of China. In the vivid green gorge, we have more overhanging vegetation and springs that are called heavenly waters that come right out of the rock face. And golden-haired monkeys play on the shores. These species are now protected by the state, and this whole area has been designated as one of the first national parks of China. This canyon land is very extensive, and much of it has not even been explored. One can get lost, but our trip will go on and return to the great main river. But the images of this mysterious and unusual countryside, natural formations will remain with us. is a historic Seoul, a city called Dachang, a site that is a historic relic of the Ming Dynasty. This walled town remains in its original condition in vernacular architecture. The buildings are simple but unique to this area, and this city has a traditional flavor that is now a nostalgia for most of China. Further up the river we come to an even smaller canyon land called the Lesser Gorges on the Horse Ferry River called the Maduha. And up in this section is the purest water coming from the high mountain region of Shennong. The Shennongjia peaks above this are the source of herbal medicines and water so clean you can drink right from the streams. The area was all once underwater as a seabed, as this stone carving shows, where ancient fossils once lived on a seabed. Here we have the opportunity to go for a swim. This area is also the home of a people called the Tuja, who are a minority people who live in the canyon land and maintain much of their traditional culture. When you come into their autonomous region and take one of their local boats, it is the custom that they will sing you their boat songs, and as is their courtesy, you return with a song of your own. As we go back down to the river, we enter the Great Wu Gorge. This second gorge is famous for its great sloping mountains that dive into the water. They're also limestone and have many caves and unusual features. This Wu Gorge is the most mysterious and wonderful of them all. It is often shrouded in clouds and mist, which are said to be the shrouds of the goddess. In tradition, the gorges were once blocked by dragons who were frolicking in the river, creating turmoil, rapids, and floods that were causing misery for the people upstream. The river could not get through, and the flood was devastating the land. The people's supplications to heaven were heard by the goddess Yangtze, who took pity on the humans and came down with her other sisters, who are now said to reside on the top of the peaks that are built on the backs of the dragons that they stabbed with their hairpin and put up on the side. These peaks stand guard over the Great Wu Gorge, keeping the river flowing and protecting the lives of the people. These 12 peaks can be seen as one passes down the river and can count the goddesses up high. Yangtze, the goddess of the mountain, stays up on her very own peak, the goddess peak. She is the figure standing there in the small valley and looks quite clearly down right to the river's edge. In ancient times, people would bow and pray to her as they passed up and down the river, for she is the protector of the gorge. Mao Zedong wrote a poem about the goddess, saying that if she could see and hear the changes that are going on in China, she would be amazed. In this section, along the slopes, there are oranges, and people make their living picking the fruit that they take down to the river to sell downstream. This magnificent gorge twists and turns through the mountains. Many times you're passing along the river, and you don't know where the river will turn next. It looks like it is completely blocked. And then suddenly you come around to be surprised by yet another stretch. The local people navigate here riding on the eddies and pulling them along the side of the river, trying to make their passage. It is a difficult life. In the rocks on the side, you can see the metamorphosis that was the seabed that was lifted up that made these formations that have many stories and legends. People passed through here and saw their own lives in the stone. This hole was said to be an arrow shot from heaven that went right through the cliff. Here on the Zhugliang niche, the Kongming Pai, ancient letters were carved, now eroded. Small streams come in that have mysterious canyons up the river. These are good fishing often with very unusual species. The Shennong stream is one of the purest that flows out of the Shennong Forest Preserve. Up here it is said that there are Bigfoot, wildman yetis, red-haired, tall primates that have been seen but never captured. They're so afraid of humans. This area is so difficult to travel in that many areas have yet to be explored, except by the local people who hike and look for herbal plants. The life here is poor. Now many people do move down to the lowlands and take the river ships to go live in the towns where there's more work. The area is not so populated, but those who do live here are sturdy and hardy people. As we come out of the Wu Gorge, we reach this town of Zigui. This county was the home of the famous poet Chu Yuan, who was an advisor to the king of Lu in ancient times down the Yangtze River. And his advice was ignored by the king, and in the turmoil of the time, the kingdom was invaded and havoc broke. His advice being unheeded, he left despondent and wrote his last poems as a dedication to the nation and threw himself into a tributary of the Yangtze. Fish brought his body up the river, carrying it to his hometown. In Chinese tradition, you must return to your hometown for burial, and to this day they honor him with dragon boat races. Also produced zongzi, which are sticky rice buns, which were traditionally thrown into the river to feed the fish to thank them for bringing Chu Yuan's body back to his hometown of Zigui. This is an annual festival all through China to this day. On a tributary near Zigui called the Xiangxi, or the Fragrant Stream, there lies the hometown of another famous figure of ancient China, Wang Zhaojun. This stream is very unusually clear and has unusual small fish in it. And it is said to be fragrant because one of the four great beauties of ancient China, she washed her hair, and to this day the stream is clear and fragrant. And in her hometown, her statue stands as one of the great first diplomats of China. She was so beautiful and talented and warm-hearted that she was sent to the imperial capital to be a consort to the emperor. And when there was a demand from the Mongol Xiongnu king to the north for a Chinese bride, she volunteered to go across the borderland up into the waste cold north to marry the Mongol chieftain and to create peace and harmony between the two nations. By her sacrifice and her diplomatic skill, she maintained the peace along the northern border for many generations, for which she is remembered to this day. As we leave Zigui, we come into the last of the gorges, the longest, the Xiling Gorge. And through this narrow passage, we begin our passage down through what used to be the worst rapids of the Yangtze. The rocks and obstacles on this part of the river were legendary. And every section has a special name. In this, the Tactic Books and Sword Gorge, there are figures along the side that are said to be books. They're actually limestone stalactite formations that are said to have been left there by generals passing in the past. At this point at Xintan, there was a great earth slide in 1985 which almost completely took the local village into the river. It blocked the river for many months. And this is an example of how unstable the limestone mountains are in their broken and ever-shifting qualities. This is a geologically alive section. At present, the government is reinforcing some of these hills with large iron spikes to try to hold them from falling in and blocking more of the river. Among the other formations down are the stalactites, which are called the horse's lung and the bull's liver, the lower section of which was used as target practice by an English gunboat and blown away in the 19th century. And the rapids below were also quite treacherous in former times. In the 1950s, many of the rocks were blown away to improve navigation. But it was not until about 100 years ago, in the 1890s, that the first motorized vessels came up under the English concession to run the Yangtze River. They were trying to improve navigation because this part of the river is so difficult to pass that it was said that it cost more to send the same amount of goods to Sichuan province through the gorges as it did to send it all the way to London. And this was a stretch. There were temples were built along the side dedicated to the river spirits and to the great Dayu, who was the emperor who first invented flood control and irrigation, and was said to have made the Yangtze River first peaceful enough to pass. Dedications to him remain from the 3rd century BC. This Wangling Temple is the largest temple along the river side and is also near the site of the new Three Gorges Dam. This broader section of the Xiling Gorge was chosen as the site because of its rock formations. The Ox Gorges above these high cliffs look down upon the section called Sandoping, which has a marble and igneous rock formation. The limestone mountains above have unusual rock formations like these shadow play figures called the Journey to the West figures. But as the Shilin Gorge goes down into its final stretches, it turns to the Sandoping area, and here, under construction now, is the world's largest dam. This will rise up 185 meters high, filling out this broad valley. This is a geologically stable region that can support such an immense project. It also provides a broad enough reach for the construction site. The dam was first proposed by Sun Yat-sen in his program for the modernization of China, and it was advised by the U.S. Bureau of Reclamation and approved by the Communist Party and the current government of China. Research has been carried on since the 1920s. An American engineer, John Savage, picked the site in the 1940s, and the plans have been laid for the construction of this dam, which will create a reservoir that will stretch back to Chongqing with a level of water that will flood the lower reaches of all these towns. Fengdu, making the temple complex an island. Shabao, flooding the town but leaving the temple complex. Over 1,300,000 people are preparing to move to higher ground or out of the area. Here at Baidi Chung, the White King City, that will remain as an island. And the gorges will remain, though the water level will pick up 175 meters on average high water during flood season. This will forever change the natural environment of the gorges. But the purposes are for flood control and hydroelectric generation and navigation improvement. Below the dam, as we leave the gorges, there's the famous Three Travelers Cave at the Nanjingguan entrance to the Shilin Gorge. This cave was a traditional stopping point where in ancient times many famous poets would stop to write about their perilous journey up into Sichuan. Their words are inscribed to this day in this cave. This region below the dam has already had its waters stilled by the lower dam of the Gudzhou. Here at the Nanjingguan, fortifications had been built at the entrance to the pass during the Three Kingdoms period. Watch over the traffic coming up. Currently, this pass is visible from the dam at Gudzhou, which is the first dam, the low rise, which has stilled the rough waters of the lower Shilin Pass. This great construction project was considered a test for the current one that is underway. It is a low-rise dam of only 20-some meters high at mean water, but is the first hydroelectric project that has spanned the Yangtze River. It is a test of how the silt control and the engineering, all done by the Chinese nation, can control this great river. Our ship passes through locks to drop down to the lower level and the mid stretches of the Yangtze River. The new dam will have 5 stage locks, each of this size. And as we pass down past the city of Yichang, the river broadens out and becomes the broad, muddy that goes all the way to the East China Sea. We've completed our journey through the great 3 gorges of the Yangtze River and seen its natural and cultural wonders. We invite all of you to come and see it now in its natural state. And in the next century, when the dam is completed and this region is flooded, it will be quite different, but have new features and have a new life in a new century. China welcomes you to see the 3 gorges.